Awesome, thank you.
Evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission held on Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024. I'd like to open the meeting at 7:30. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Carpenter.
Here.
Mr. Fitzer.
Here.
Mr. Colbert.
Here.
Mr. Kucera.
Here.
Mr. Nishai. Ms. Redmond.
Here.
Mr. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Solomon. Here. Mr. Titman.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is approval of the existing agenda. Does anyone have any problems with the agenda as it stands? Seeing none, I will approve it as it is, and we'll move on to number 5, which is approval of the regular meeting minutes from January 9, 2024, our last meeting.
I move to approve meeting minutes from January 9th, 2024.
Support.
Motion,
I have-
support. Any changes?
Yeah, one item. So agenda item number 14, it is the adjournment item. It says motion Redmond, support Scott. While I probably would have supported it if I had been here, I wasn't. So I'm thinking that's probably somebody else.
Yeah.
I can make that change without a motion as well.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for calling that out. I'm glad someone reads the minutes.
Okay, so I'll accept it with a slight change.
Just keeping you on your toes.
Yes.
You know.
May I have roll call on that, please?
Mr. Colbert.
Yes.
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll make that change.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public wishing to opine, say anything? No one rushing to the microphone. Then I will close public discussion, and we'll move on to agenda item number 7 is a mural review for 38 South Main Street, which is Gus's Snug.
Right. You may know the location as the former Lucky Duck and also the former Moose Winooski's. I think everybody's familiar with it. Put a couple photos of it in the review, and we're kind of familiar with the topic because we just looked at one up the street at the last meeting. So we have a site that's pretty much entirely building. They've got a little dining area and a little kind of loading area in the background, but otherwise it's all taken up by the building. They're proposing 2 pieces of art, and you can see on page 2 of the mural there where they're proposed. One's kind of on the south side at the corner, and the other one is on sort of a blank brick area on the front facade there facing east. There are images of those items in the letter as well. You can see what they look like. And then just looking at our usual mural review. So we look for the commercial message. Is it more than 25% of the total mural area? The front wall piece does include some text. It's less than 25% of the total area. The other piece doesn't have any text or logo. The one on the front is kind of an old poster for Guinness, so originally a commercial message and kind of more of a historical reproduction kind of thing now. The mural complements the building colors and aesthetics. Both pieces are designed to resemble or derive from kind of old school pub signage, and that's what this is sort of aspiring to be, is a traditional Irish pub. And then the mural is considered to be a public benefit, which cannot be achieved using the standard wall signage requirements. So you definitely couldn't do these signs under a standard wall sign application. I did get a message from the DDA director a few minutes ago. She had intended to be here, and I guess she's homesick. But she wanted me to mention that she supports the proposed artworks on the building. And I don't know if anybody's got any discussion or questions for me.
I'm in support of it, but the only problem or question I have is I wouldn't call this a mural review because neither of these are what I would consider a mural. A mural to me is something that's actually painted on the building. The one on the front looks like it's a framed print of some sort.
It is. It's a little different. It's not painted directly on the brick. That's right.
And the big bird, I'm assuming he's made out of metal or plastic or something. He's not being physically painted on the building.
It appears to be an applique rather than paint.
So I would think that they would fall under the term of a signage, not necessarily a mural. But personally, I'm in favor. I think it's going to be a great addition. I think they look wonderful to me.
Yeah, it is true that they're not murals the way we typically think of murals as being painted directly on a surface. But that's really the only review mechanism we have for art like this. So I'm kind of dancing around the term mural by saying art piece and stuff like that. But yes, this really is the only mechanism we have to analyze something
Yeah, that's
like
the only problem I
this.
had just with that one word, mural is all. Does anybody else have any?
Well, with that
Comment?
said, I guess, would there be degradation to the bird over time? And like how well does that hold up versus paint? You know, I'm sure it has something to do with whether or not they actually own the building and they can actually apply paint. I don't know if that's the reason they're not putting it directly on the building, but do we know what that material is and how?
Have a gentleman here who
Yeah.
does.
Perfect.
Yeah. My name is Dimitri Goifman. I'm one of the owners of Gus's Snug. It's a pleasure to be here. So the idea behind this is we did want to paint it at first, but the cost was super prohibitive from doing, a 20-foot bird. I think I got quotes for like $15,000 and up from a good artist. And I would want a good artist because we want it to look good. So we did some research, and this option came up. So it is out of a outside material that is a metal and plastic combination. So it is supposed to last a very long time without fading and any kind of issues. So that was kind of, the original was we wanted to paint it. So that we started kind of researching some other options. And I think too, if it did start fading or there's some kind of damage to it, it would probably be a lot easier to replace and keep up, making sure it looks good. Because the bird is in like 3 pieces. So let's say one piece is fading or something's wrong with it. We have all the files and everything like that to be able to just remake it and replace it.
So the backing is a metal backing on
Yeah,
that?
it's like it's metal and with plastic in the middle. So it's like a special material that's made for signs, and then it's die cut. So it will look like from a distance that it's painted on there.
So is the St. James gate the same material?
Yes.
So
Yep.
it's got a UV protection, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
on it?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. So that was the best recommendation. There was not guaranteed to a certain degree, but from the printer, they said that they have a good application for this kind of a material. So.
And is it like glued on to the?
So, that would be a good, yes, so it'd probably be glued on and I'm assuming screwed on as well. That would have to be with the contractor, they're gonna install the signage, so. But the idea is we wanna make sure, we wanna bring that whole, authentic pub feel. And I think the way the building is on that corner of Jefferson and Main, if you're heading, towards, Troy, I think it'll look really kind of cool and stand out. Something different that will attract some, people driving by going, hey, this is kind of cool. Let's stop on Clausen, and hopefully they stop by our place. They go somewhere else, and so we're here to kind of help the community get a little bit better restaurant scene, and hopefully draw some people here.
Is the bird owned by Guinness?
It is. So the bird is technically is a Guinness,
Or-
it's not a logo, it's an art piece. So they do a bunch of different, they're called Gilroys. Throughout time, they did a ton of different, animals and
Yeah.
things like that. So we actually, Guinness is actually, they are helping us purchase the art.
So
So
you
it
have
is
no
sanctioned by
copyright
Guinness.
problems or
No,
anything
there's
like
no
that?
problems, no,
Okay.
no.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we're working with them to actually do this, so.
Oh, great. Any further questions, or everybody likes the bird, or all happy?
Well, if it doesn't look good, we'll take it down. That's another easier thing about not painting it. So if something is,
You'll
people
just compete with the
complain.
chicken we have down here, so.
Well, I think it's a little cooler than the chicken, but
Uh-oh.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the mural art at 38 South Main as presented.
Second.
Motion support. Any further comments? Seeing none, I'll take roll call, please.
sorry.
Mr. Kucera,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Colbert.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to Clausen again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy to be here.
Good. Agenda item number 8 is our master plan discussion, the corridor discussion, follow-up, and survey results.
So we'll address the corridor follow-up first, and then we'll get into the public.
Okay.
Yeah, so received a memo from Joe and Andy today, just recapping the conversation that we had last meeting. I haven't had a chance to review, but once I get a chance to review it, I'm going to send it to the commission, so that way you're all aware of some of the feedback that they gathered based on the discussion last meeting. And then February meeting, we can talk about it and, make sure that's kind of what the board was, had some consensus on. And then that'll be helped to use draft language for the master plan. So that's kind of the intent with that. So I'm hoping to have the memo in your guys' email tomorrow morning, afternoon at the latest. So that's all we have there.
And then we've prepared the BRD2 district discussion for next meeting as well. So that's ready to roll, and we're going to talk about it next time. Tonight, we're going to start delving into the public input. We won't get to all of it. There's a lot of it. So I don't want to shortchange any of it. So I thought we would do kind of part 1 tonight and then part 2 next time, so that we can actually discuss it all. Before we get to that, though, there's a topic I want to address that we haven't really talked about yet. And I'm going to get this up on the screen here. Should be coming up in a second. There we go. All right. So, and if anybody has any questions about the full results, I've got them all on here, so I can always access them during the course of the conversation. So before we get into that, I wanted to talk about something called the redevelopment sites. This is something, as you know, we're involved with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation's Redevelopment Ready Communities program. And one of the things that they do with certified communities is they actually will help market priority redevelopment sites. And they've got a bunch on their website right now with within some of their certified communities. So you can actually go to their website and check this out. And we can send this presentation to you so you'll have the link. But basically what they do is they provide assistance trying to find developers and match them with priority sites in a community. So if you've got something that's, typically it's a dormant site, usually it's not something that's thriving. They've done this with all kinds of different sites. They've done this with sites that are municipality owned. They've done it with sites that are privately owned, where the owner of the site has agreed to partner with the city and the MEDC on trying to find the right match for the site. And in some of those cases, the current owner of the site has wound up selling the site, and in others, they've kind of been like an undercapitalized individual who couldn't quite complete a development, but they were paired with someone who was able to bring that element to the site and partner with them, and they were able to develop the site and retain ownership. So it kind of goes in a lot of different directions. But I did just want to put this on your radar because one of the things that we can do here, and this wasn't originally in our scope, I'm kind of adding it in as something to think about, is we don't necessarily have to identify specific sites in the plan, but what we should do is at least consider what criteria we might look for in a site that we were going to consider taking to the MEDC. So I've included a few photos here of sites that we all drive by a lot, and one's at 14 Mile and Pear, one's at Main and Nakota, the one at the top there, and then the other one's at Main and Baker. Two of them are completely vacant, and then the other one is, as we know, kind of a contaminated legacy site that has had challenges with redevelopment over the years. So generally speaking, like I said earlier, focusing on inactive sites kind of makes the most sense because you're trying to create activity where there is none. You're trying to actually identify viable opportunities for redevelopment. And if you pick an active site, then you're less likely to get traction on that unless the owner is really in agreement that they want to end whatever use is happening there and go in a different direction. So this is something I just wanted to put on your radar tonight. I'm not expecting anyone to, have the answers right now, but what I figured I would do is put together a list of criteria for consideration, and then we can talk about that at a future meeting as well, now that you're familiar with the topic and what it is. And then we could kind of hammer out what we want our criteria to be for these sites going forward, and we can slip that in the plan update, and we'll be all set to go when we get the opportunity with the MEDC in the future.
Joe, can I ask a few questions?
Sure.
So these sites, what type of obligations does the city have? Are we obligated to do certain tax incentives on these sites, or?
No, actually, there's surprisingly few strings attached to it.
Okay.
They'll work on up to 3 sites at once in a given community. So if you look at most of these communities on the map, you'll see 2 or 3 sites, generally speaking. A couple of them only have 1. And then I'm sure there are some communities that have others in the queue that are kind of like, okay, well, if these 3 go, we could always do another one. But yeah, they'll work on 3 sites with you at once. And there aren't any specific hard and fast requirements for abatements or incentives or anything like that.
So would there be any requirements in terms of specific zoning outside the scope of what it's already zoned for, like a PUD type situation, or is it?
No, conventional zoning or a PUD would both be options.
Okay.
And they primarily look at non-residential sites or non-single family sites, I should say. They've done plenty of multifamily or plenty of sites that have resulted in multifamily construction. But typically, you're looking along main corridors or in commercial or commercial fringe areas.
So I guess it would be helpful to know, maybe for our next conversation, for me at least, what their redevelopment-ready criteria is, so we can kind of see where they've maybe already handled certain aspects of it. I don't know if it's constantly changing, if they, so it sounds different than a brownfield type situation.
It is,
But they
yeah.
could do both, technically, right? Like, so for
Sure.
the bump shop, we've talked before about it potentially being like a brownfield situation eventually, and someone can double down and use both those, right, on that site potentially?
Right, yeah, any of these sites could have other things going on them. You could have a brownfield site that you wanted to work with the MEDC to find a project for, and they don't restrict themselves to non-brownfield or anything like that.
Okay.
Are the 3 sites that you have shown here, are these just examples, or have you already contacted the?
No, these are just
Owners,
examples.
okay.
Yeah, these are just examples of sites with low or no activity on them that
Yeah.
I think we're all aware of, basically.
Do you have to have a certain number of redevelopment to be part of that program? or
No, ultimately you don't.
Okay.
But it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
So the CNC Bump Shop, there's actually someone that's working on some environmental work right now. They're doing their phase 2, I believe, on the site. So, relevant right now, I don't know if it'd be redevelopment ready, because I think we might have some movement on that before we'd even get to that point. So kind of exciting that there's interest there. So, it's kind of in the hands of what the environmental reports bring back before anything comes to this body or council or in front of us. So we do have some activity going on there, and I think that the interested party is very excited to hopefully fix up that site and make it a big improvement. So just want to let you all know. Thank you.
And I think this is fantastic for a site like that has been vacant and a blight for a long time, if we still hadn't have any action on it, right?
Right,
So I appreciate Joe
exactly.
bringing this to our attention. How do we get connected and put it out there? Maybe highlight it more as an opportunity for redevelopment. Now, what about these 2 other options as open green space, and we just have almost none in the city? Is there
Right.
anything, and this might just be because I'm naive, but, that you've seen that can connect us with other resources besides just general development? Is there something that we could do to, make it a better gathering space for the city? Or, when you connect these locations with potential, redevelopment, is there any criteria? Is it just people looking to develop more housing and things like that? I'm trying to think of how could we make it a different
Right.
park place or something like, that could be a benefit to the city besides just more development for homes and things.
If you were looking for something specific, you could always go to the MEDC with that.
So you
kind
could
of
have criteria
angle.
or, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, do we ever do anything with like the rail? I get emails from Rails and Trails where they've got grants all the time, and I don't know how much they do in suburban type areas, because it seems like they kind of are more rural, but there's lots of opportunities to have different organizations that would kind of touch
A different
that.
benefit for the city, right?
Right.
Right. And I don't know.
Getting rid of all available green space and then there's
Right.
nothing left.
Because of course, the developer is going to want to maximize
Yeah.
what they can, but do we do things like that, Joe? And I mean, I've never heard of us working with Rails and Trails or anything like that, any type of government body that,
Yeah, I don't know what the city's history of trying to proactively do things like that is. I know there were some discussions with the DDA about what could be done with some vacant land in the downtown at one point, but when there was no reciprocal interest, the conversation just kind of died. So that's the thing with property that's in private hands, you have to have interest from both sides. So sometimes that can be a little hard to strike up. But I'm not real sure if the city has much history with proactively trying to find someone to work on a site. I don't think it does.
Okay.
I know the DDA's in the past, I don't know what the status is right now, but in the past, I know they've kept like a,
May I offer some insight into that?
Sure.
Sure.
Actually, there's good evening. Some of you I do not know. My name is Rennis. I'm the city attorney. And of course, as Mr. Casero will say, that's because I haven't appeared too often in here.
Yeah, we haven't seen you around.
You've run it all too well, I think.
Where's your weather tonight?
Tells you how close we are. I don't know. As you will all know, we have a new charter. The new charter added some language with respect to protecting some of our resources and what it takes for the community to dissipate those resources, to be able to sell. We put a certain threshold now, after which, in order for us to sell city property or land, we would have to go to the community by way of a vote. Part of what the new charter did is create an opportunity to have an ordinance review committee. And that committee just met prior to this meeting at 6 o'clock. And one of the topics that we're going to address that I recommended that we address is something the charter was silent on, which was acquisition of property, which is basically what we're talking about in here. The city, Joe is correct, the city doesn't have a history of acquiring property per se. It's done a terrible job since the inception, which is why we are only 2.2 square miles and everybody else gobbled up all the land around us. I think we need to be better, and those are exact opportunities. I use a terrible example, and people typically tell me how wrong I am to use this example, but I will use it with you as well, where Biscuits and Gravy is today. They came some time ago as a tax foreclosure, and the city has, there's a specific law that we have on the books, statute, that would have allowed the city to acquire the property for just a handful of dollars. I think we ought to expand upon those abilities, and I think there's probably consensus to be able to do so. It does require some buy-in from the community. I guess this is my pitch for asking all of you to participate just prior to your meetings. We're always coinciding with your meetings, 6 o'clock every Tuesday that you meet. Just at the community room, I will take it upon myself to let you know when we start talking specifically about the ability to acquire property. I think your participation will be necessary. I think it will be so helpful. I think it's a necessity for this community for all the reasons that you've outlined, of course.
And is that open to the public as well?
course.
Brayden?
Of
So
course.
where can
It
anybody
just-
listening find information on when that meets and what time? I mean, you said it, but just online?
Right,
Is there a place?
yeah, and there's always a notice. Michelle, our city clerk, always puts up a notice for all our meetings as well, and she's adding it to the calendar going forward. So, the city's calendar, so you'll be able to see it as well. Again, we'll take it upon, obviously, because any ordinance that deals with zoning, it comes through this body, you don't need those, and we're not touching those, but we're reviewing everything else, and whether it was impacted or even not impacted, but perhaps useful at this time to be able to review. The process will be somewhat slow, and this is, the ordinance review committee doesn't make any decisions. All they do is have the conversation, generate an ordinance that then is presented to the city council for their consideration. But I think some community feedback will be necessary and helpful, particularly in this area. I think there's obviously a reason why there hasn't been over the years a whole lot of involvement or commitment by the city to be able to acquire land, and it probably has to do with our budgeting and funding and so on and so forth. But certainly opportunities do arise, things change, sometimes needs determine what the outcomes ought to be, and this is one of those areas that perhaps can use a little more, a little different direction from what we've had in the past, so.
Hey, Rennis, while you're here talking about that, do you guys plan to address anything such as vacant blight type commercial areas and I know that that's ultimately us, but
Yeah.
someone has to trigger it to bring to us. And I've been
Yeah.
kind of touting that for a while now, as well as, opportunities to, say, a green space that's left empty planting trees. I know that's something we've talked about in the past, and having some type of requirement, like, okay, well, you can have that green space, wide open field, but we require 2 plants or 2 trees on there, something like that. I know it's been discussed, and I don't know.
As to the second, that's an easy yes. We
Okay.
will have such a conversation. The former, though, it is you. It has to stem from this body, right? All that, and I think, as I'm sure Joe will agree, that is a little tougher an area, obviously. If we had that ability, or if we had the ability to be able to accomplish all our communal heart's desire, I presume Detroit wouldn't look the way Detroit does, if nothing else. So we face some of the same, restrictions in legislating in the area. To be perfectly honest with you, I am all for it, and I'm all for pushing the envelope in that regard because it'll help this community, period. We do require development. I mean, to have something like one of those sites that obviously we're all familiar with and looking the way it does in the center of downtown does not do justice to this town, obviously. So I'm all for it. At the same token, though, just given the limitations that we have on our ability to legislate in that regard, I can
So our
also.
ability to legislate, sorry to interrupt you, but is not because we don't have an ordinance that's stating
Oh,
it.
no,
It's just
no.
simply the fact that we got to kind of stay in our lane, and people have freedom to have property.
Private property
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And,
Yeah.
no, the areas that we can legislate in, we have legislated in, and we do have ordinances in the books, and those are code enforcement related.
Right.
But above and beyond those, it can get obviously very tricky, and we're very limited,
Okay.
unfortunately.
I would love to discuss that further in terms of
Absolutely.
like inspection or,
So I would like to volunteer Joe for all your.
I mean, as part, because it is something we've touched on in the past, and I do think that there are buildings that have been vacant for years, and you think about the rats and who knows if the water's on or cut off, or what, I'm sure code enforcement does keep track of certain things, but I feel like there are still mechanisms, maybe I'm just ignorant, that we don't employ that maybe could be written and followed through with, but I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe.
you'll be surprised how limited we are as
Yeah.
municipalities, unfortunately, when it comes to, because we're talking about the intersection of, the rights of a municipality as a home rule city act, meaning as a statutory or incorporated entity, as against private property rights as established by the Constitution of the United States. Needless to say, the Constitution will prevail 10 out of 10 times. That's not to say that we cannot legislate. Again,
Right.
Code enforcement is exactly that, right? We have some requirements in place, and perhaps being better at enforcing those requirements will definitely be easier as opposed to legislating. But, again,
Okay,
we're here, ready to do it,
thank you.
of course.
Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Any other questions on this? Like I said, there will be more in the future. But I just wanted to introduce the topic tonight because it's something that we haven't really talked about. It's something that wasn't really in the scope of the plan, and I'm introducing it late. So I just wanted to get it in front of you, get it on your radar, and then we'll have a kind of substantive decision-making
So
discussion
Joe,
about it
I
later.
actually met with the I think it was part of the redevelopment ready when they come around and do a survey every year with the DDA. Are they the same ones? They come around
Yeah,
and
it's
kind of-
most likely, as long as they're from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and they're part of RRC.
Is that right,
yeah.
Nick? Oh, Main
Oh,
Street, okay,
okay.
never mind, sorry, that was Main
Okay.
Street. So this one goes everywhere, all over the city, as long as it's a commercial-ish
Yeah.
area, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, not limited to downtowns.
Thanks,
do-
Jeff. I think that's a good resource. Sounds like it's already available to us that we could utilize.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah.
So you said, do you want us to think of criteria to come to the next meeting with? When are we
Yeah.
going to readdress this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can think about, okay, what makes sense to try to focus on in terms of the types of sites that we'd like to see, getting some energy behind them. And who could we partner with and.
And Joe, you're going to send that
EDC.
presentation to us, the file? the file that you're
Yeah,
showing them?
yeah.
Okay.
It's got the link in there to their map, so you
Can
can
I
kind of
make
see how
one
they're
more?
marketing other ones.
Before you end, I think it would be I know these ones, well, the CNC Bump Shop has a historical aspect, I believe, to it.
Sure, yeah,
Something I
it's a
really
historic
took
building.
away from the Main Street stuff, I know it's not the same, but I really like their focus on preserving certain historical aspects of buildings, of the character of the city. So if there's opportunity for that, maybe that's something that we can consider or discuss next time as part of criteria.
Sure, yeah, I know that absolutely could be part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And it could be part of it, you can have kind of an if A then B type structure to your criteria, so if you're in a certain area or if a building is of a certain age or something, then that's one of the criteria that you're going to look at. And then if you're looking at more of a formerly developed, now vacant site or something, you might have a different set of criteria that you're applying there.
Okay.
All right. Go on to the public input, the first part of it anyway. So a quick summary of kind of who we heard from. We had 378 people who contributed to at least one part of the survey. General questions had the most responses. That was the first part of the survey, so that kind of makes sense. We had 235 answer the housing questions, 116 answer the sustainability and resiliency questions. The Sustainability Committee has the results of their prioritization of the sustainability goals and is actually using that to help guide the final development of the sustainability chapter. 94 answered the city budget question, 58 answered the walking and biking questions, 46 answered the parking question, 73 people marked the flooding, road conditions, and sidewalks maps, and then 37 people marked the biking and walking feedback map. So we got responses across all. Of course, the concentration of responses was in that first portion of the survey, but we do have data to talk about everywhere. Starting with the general questions, this is really what I'm focusing on tonight. We'll also take a look at a couple of those maps and talk a little bit about the symbology and things on them. 93.87% of our respondents live here. We had a couple people who own businesses or otherwise work here or something like that who also responded. And then 93.28%, 347 people, own a single-family home. So that's a pretty high concentration in homeowners. Just for reference, 71.47% of the city households are owners. So we had a higher concentration of owners than we have citywide answering the survey. Nearly half of respondents were from two-person households. So our average household size is 1.93. So that kind of tracks. We have a lot of two-person households. 69.89% had no children living with them. About 15.5% of city households include kids at this point. So we had a slightly higher number of households with children in them than the overall percentage in the city. The respondents were concentrated in the 35 to 54 age range. We had almost as many 55 plus when you can add up the multiple categories that's divided into. Respondent tenure in the city was very evenly spread across all the date ranges that we gave. So we said, I've lived here for less than 5 years, I've lived here for more than 30 years, and then we broke it down into a couple categories in between. And it was just very, very evenly spread between people who are new here, people who lived here for a very long time, and people who lived here, at intermediate amounts of time. Overall, people who took our survey like the city. You can see the question, the first question there, where you see the graph is, how likely are you to speak positively about Clawson to others? One person said very unlikely. Two said unlikely. A couple people said somewhat likely, but the vast majority of responses were in the likely or very likely.
Are we capable of tracking their names? Or that's off the chart somewhere?
So generally speaking, people who took this survey, they feel positively about Clawson overall. They would talk it up to people they met. People do also like the overnight parking policy on balance. You can see the yes bar outpaces the no bar by quite a lot there.
Hey, Joe, real quick, let's back up to the overall, like, satisfaction, likelihood to recommend the city. That was an open-ended as well, right? So I think you had, like, provide a response with an open box, right, for text?
I don't think that one had a text.
I thought it did.
If it does, I can pull the answers for it, but I
That's what I
don't
was
think it
wondering.
did.
How are you handling, like, open verbatim responses? Are you guys doing, like, text analytics, or you just?
We're gonna
Reading all of them?
we're gonna talk about a couple of them,
Okay.
we have two open-ended questions that we're gonna discuss tonight. As far as that one, I don't think it had a text
Yeah, I could have been wrong, I'm sorry.
option.
Wasn't there one that was like describe the city or something? Use words to describe.
Yeah,
That's- maybe
you'll
that's
see
thinking
you'll
of.
see those questions
Yeah.
addressed in a little
Maybe
bit.
that's what
yeah.
I'm thinking of.
Possibly, yeah.
So no overnight parking, huh?
That seems to be
That
the
one-
consensus.
We'll save that one for the developers next time they come in. Put it in our pocket.
Here's an example of one of those questions that was more open-ended. What do you feel makes Clawson a desirable community? And we had said in 3 words or phrases. This is not a very refined word cloud here. I'd like to do a little bit more work on grouping like terms, and half of a phrase might show up in here, but the word cloud does a decent job of at least highlighting some of the things that people felt was most important to making this a desirable community. The small town feel, safety, a sense of community, walkability, friendliness, the downtown, a convenient location, and this was said a lot of different ways, which is one of the reasons I want to refine the list of words here so that we can kind of capture that a little bit better as to how important that was to people. But people generally, we got a lot of answers that pointed toward, like, we are close to a lot of things. We're well positioned relative to I-75 and Woodward and a few other things that help you get, do regional travel very easily. And that's actually kind of, in all the communities I've worked in southern Oakland County, that's a pretty common, like over to Farmington Hills. Once you get past Farmington Hills, the convenience thing doesn't come up very much. But a lot of those communities, the people who live in them seem to feel like, all right, we're close to Detroit, we're close to freeways that can get us where we need to go, we're close to other interesting communities. It just sort of seems like this part of the metro area has that going for it in general.
Joe, do the words portray how many times it was hit, that specific word?
It tries to represent the frequency.
So like small was said more times than great, so that's a bigger word. Am I
Right.
understanding that correct?
And
Okay.
it's often as part of small town. Again, I want to refine the way it
We're small too, but
comes through.
yeah.
Well, we are small,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think some people actually did point out that the small size of the city, that's part of the reason it's walkable, and that's part of the reason there's a sense of community. Living in a place like Troy, you might live 7 miles from someone else who lives in Troy, and that's just not possible in Clawson. We're too small for that. We all live very close together. It's not just the small town feel necessarily, it's the actual geographic smallness of the city that people were also pointing to. But in general, people seem to kind of point to that small town community safety. They like that we have a core, a downtown. And as you'll see in the next question, they're put out when there's something wrong with it. It bothers people when there's like a hole in the downtown. So the next question focused on what do you think Clausen's biggest challenges are, and there was a kind of a category of responses that talked about city leadership and politics and that kind of thing. Taxes definitely were a frequently mentioned item. Infrastructure, as you can see, roads, infrastructure, one's a part of the whole. They dominated. And when we look at the maps later on, you're going to see a lot of dots where people were like, this part of this road looks like a moonscape and something needs to be done about it. So a lot of those things correlate to what we saw in other questions and other sections of the survey. Where downtown pops up, that's generally related to concerns about either vacancy or land that is open and in some cases has been sitting open for a very long time. A few people specifically mentioned the Pizza Hut site. They want something there rather than nothing there. The schools did come up a fair amount as well. And from the collective responses, it's a little hard to tell exactly what is meant by that. If people are talking about the quality of the schools or the fact that the district has shrunk or exactly what's going on in those responses. I got to dig a little deeper and see if I can figure out if there's a theme or an overall tenor to people mentioning that. But it definitely has come up, and I'm happy to share the full text results too. I've got spreadsheets with all of the complete answers in them if anybody wants them. It's just, there's like 300 and something responses with all the text, so just be aware that it's a fairly large data dump, but if anybody wants it, like I said, I'm more than happy to provide it.
Do you actually have I assume you have, because you did word cloud,
Yep.
you have the word frequency list?
Yes, I do,
Alright.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
That might be interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, yeah. And I can provide that as well if you want, if you think it'd be useful for you.
The AI tools for Amazon reviews have done a pretty good job. I don't know what's available for you guys, but if you've seen those, they actually like aggregate all that feedback and they pull out some good insights.
Interesting.
surprisingly.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any free available tools, but just to help you dig through 300 comments.
Sure, yeah. No, I've been going through and trying to refine the responses. So, like, on one of the questions we're going to get to, there was groceries and grocery and grocers and grocery store and grocery shopping. So I went through and I was like, all right, let's do some find and replace and make it all groceries so that we know how many people are actually saying that one thing. And I've been trying to do that with the rest of these. So I'll have some refined versions of these at some point. But
So like here, we're looking for like hidden insight challenges. Because when I see schools, it's like, well, everybody knows that
Yeah.
the school's right sizing, but there's a proactiveness to what the schools are doing.
Right.
So that's not something that like, well, anyway, it's kind of outside our scope in the first place.
it
but,
is, of course, yeah.
But really, like, it seems like that's kind of an obvious, right? Like that
Sure.
the schools are right sizing and they're, I guess, infrastructure too. But like, was there any, when you were doing this, any type of hidden insight that wasn't blatantly obvious to you?
There really wasn't much surprising in here, to be perfectly honest. There's a little bit of things are a little overdeveloped, but not much. I was expecting maybe even a little more of that. Infrastructure, like I said, really led the way. I wasn't surprised to hear about taxes. you know, there wasn't a whole lot of surprise in it. It was kind
Yeah.
of what I expected to be the main things are kind of what I expected. And, you know, there's a reason that we've come to expect those answers and because we hear it all the time, right? And no, this didn't really buck any of that. I felt
Yeah.
like it went kind of right to the bullseye of everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, and because I see development there, but that could be like lack of development or too much. But I guess you kind of look through both of those as
Yeah,
options.
and it's not just too much. Sometimes it's the wrong type. Sometimes
type,
people are
okay.
feeling like, this is not quite what I wanted.
Too many auto shops or something. That's something I hear.
There is some of that, yes.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So our next general question was, how do you feel about paying for improvements to public infrastructure? So this is an interesting companion to the previous question, where roads and infrastructure are the two largest things, and roads is part of infrastructure. So infrastructure just dominates. And we got this spread when we asked about how people feel about paying for improvements to public infrastructure. So one is, the top line is, I'd be willing to pay more for progress. The middle line is, I am willing to tolerate slower progress in exchange for taxes remaining the same. And then the bottom line is, I feel I already pay too much in taxes and would not be willing to pay more. They are, for all intents and purposes, they all got the same exact number of responses. So that's a tension that, I mean, the Planning Commission is going to make its recommendations on infrastructure. When the city, primarily council, is dealing with that in the future, that's a tension that they have to navigate, is people are unsatisfied with the state of our infrastructure, but also we have some resistance to paying additional to accelerate the repair and maintenance of that infrastructure. How do we handle that? It's a very complicated question.
Well, it is, especially since if you look at it in those two, yes or no, essentially you've got more no's than yes, right? Like, people are willing to tolerate, and
Right.
they already pay too much, so they don't want to. Those are essentially no's.
They're
that's like
nose
60
to, they're nose to paying more.
Right,
Yeah.
so is this something that will be shared with council as just a FYI kind of thing, like, hey?
I mean, yes. I
saying
mean,
yes
well,
to,
ultimately,
but-
they'll receive the plan and the full results will be in there too. But it's something that can be communicated to them specifically as well, just so that they're aware of this particular result. But one of the things that it tells me is that there's an advocacy element that might be missing, right? Because people need to be able to make the connection between what they're paying and how it's being used. And they simply may not be able to make that connection at the moment. There might not be enough of a public connection there for people to be putting them together. People may feel that, you know, because of the area of the city that they live in hasn't really gotten much attention, but another area did, that what they're paying isn't coming back to them. So, you know, how you prioritize things, how you spread things around, how you communicate about what's going to happen and when, it's all very important. And I think that from our perspective as a planning commission, for one thing, we'll be reviewing capital improvement plans every year. But for another, we have to put together an implementation chapter for this master plan update that we're working on. So we have to think about what kind of advocacy, what kind of public outreach and education we might want to call for in the plan that could provide some sort of foundation for how the city reaches out on these things in the future and maybe tries to bring people along on what it's doing. Because, you know, like I said, it's like everybody's number one, like, this is the biggest challenge we're facing, but then what are we going to do about it, and are people willing to support what we need to do about it, right? It's a tough nut to crack, and
So, yeah,
no
do you-
one has the perfect answer, but there's definitely some things that we can call for.
Do you have an example of something you've used in other, I mean, because this is common in council meetings if you watch them. I mean,
Sure.
I'm sure people here know they're big about putting forth a road project kind of thing. It just those kinds of things, or like will you give us some specific direction on examples that we
absolutely,
can
yeah.
implement in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to just give you a blank chart and say, fill it in. No, we'll definitely have some guidance on that as we put that together, but it's of course always open for discussion, and if there are things we want to place emphasis on or something like that, that's kind of where the planning commission can guide that, right?
Well, and just outreach in general, I think, like you said, it speaks to just our communication with the community and our
Sure.
ability to use social media or other
Right.
forms with given our aging population, how we might do those things. And if we're not creating the plan, we're just saying, let's get a plan together for that kind of thing, right?
Right,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the city's working on getting a communications person right now. But yeah, I mean, the city is, obviously, every city has more that it can do. But, there may be some very specific things that we can point to in terms of how do we keep people informed? How do we make the connection between what people are paying and what's happening on our roads and to the pipes under our roads more explicit and more clear to people? And some of that could come out of the capital improvement regime and maybe a little bit more tracking and dashboard type things. But some of it could also be more direct communication. Another kind of word cloudy question that we asked, and I alluded to editing this one a little bit earlier. What services and businesses do you typically leave Clausen for? Sorry about the dangling participle there. I shouldn't have ended it with for, but groceries was the number one, which we have a grocery store, we have Aldi, and we don't have like a full service grocery store, so that's not surprising. There were some people who specifically said Meijer or specifically said some other, Kroger or something. But that, I expected that to be the number one. Restaurants is a little larger than I expected it to be, but I think that we have enough nearby communities that have big concentrations of restaurants that it's kind of natural that people are going to want some variety and go to those places as well. So they're probably also patronizing local restaurants, but they're going elsewhere as well. Retail, big boxes got mentioned a couple of times because we just don't really have that here. Now, there's a companion question to this. What kind of businesses do you want to see more of in Clausen? Businesses and services, not just businesses. And it's interesting, there is talk about department stores and big boxes and things like that. As these are things I leave the city for, but virtually no one said that's what I want in the city because it's really not the character of Clausen, right? And people, I think, understand that. But looking at that question, it's interesting that restaurants is so big. Because I think that people, okay, I'll say this as a person who does not live in Clausen but lives nearby. That's like one of the things I come here for is restaurants. So to see that listed as like the biggest thing that people would like to see more of in Clausen is really intriguing to me. And I think
nail salons didn't make the list. I think we got that kind of covered.
we probably got that covered.
And then pizza.
Joe, you didn't see anything else that was accompanied by restaurants like upscale Or, like a certain variety of food,
There were a couple of responses that got specific about type, but not many.
Okay,
It
so
was-
it's more general.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, there's a restaurant right next to restaurant, so, you're not even grouping all.
Right,
actual
yeah,
answers
I
together,
probably
so
didn't get to
that could be bigger.
pluralizing that one. It is bigger.
Definitely interesting.
But yeah, it's interesting. Groceries, of course, is number 2. I think that, I hear this over in Berkeley too. Ever since Hillers went away, we used to have a Hillers right in downtown Berkeley. It was fantastic. You could just walk to go get groceries, and now you can't. And you hear all the time, it would be great to have a grocery store back in downtown. That's not a model that's very common in the United States anymore. at
Yeah,
this
well,
point.
so there is a distinction between, like we've talked, I think it was last meeting, we talked about having like a mart where you can get fresh stuff. So
Right.
that's not, do you know if there was a distinction made between like, hey, I just want to go get fresh
Some people
fruit.
actually specifically called for that.
It's
for
small to read, but
Yeah,
it says
it's smaller.
butcher, like
Yeah.
butchery.
butcher, okay.
Market, butcher, those were all mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fresh.
We did have a butcher shop years ago, and I think they lasted 2, maybe 3 years. A couple Australian guys on 14 Mile, and they went away.
Yeah,
Well, you could-
it's kind of a tough business to be in,
Yeah.
but there is some desire for that sort of specialty food type thing. Boutiques came up a few times, and specialty stores, books and music got mentioned a couple times. There's one sheepish little cannabis down there. Yeah, that one, I was kind of wondering how big that one would be, but it's actually really small. It barely made the list, which is kind of interesting.
Joe, thinking about the restaurants, do you recall the timing of when the survey was out and we got a lot of hits compared to? Because I'm wondering, was this in between like Lucky Duck and Gus's Snug, or was this?
That's a really good point because it was.
Okay.
Grand River Brewery had not come into the Pumachug space yet. Gus's Snug was probably
They were only about a week apart. Though,
yeah.
when they opened, so.
Yeah, it
But
was
it's a good point if you're
probably-
looking at a
Right.
Yeah.
empty building.
If there were two empty
corner,
buildings,
you're
Yeah.
not
right.
thinking that's,
Data was probably before those opened.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, it was.
So it might be over-indexed a little bit in terms of.
That's possible,
Yeah.
yeah. It is possible. But the volume of the response tells me that it probably wasn't just that. It seems like people do want, in general, more of that particular category. It wouldn't be quite that large, I think, if it was affected by temporal factors like that. One word that's kind of large here is small, and I'm working on trying to get that to group better with other things. But you saw a lot of like small market, small this, small that, like kind of neighborhood service type things.
You don't want the large grocery stores, you want a smaller.
Exactly,
operation. Yeah.
exactly. There weren't, like, nobody seemed to be responding saying, I want a Kroger in the middle of downtown or something. Like, they seemed to be saying, like, we want more variety and more close to home so that I don't necessarily have to drive 3 miles or something to get to what I need. It's a convenience factor, but it's also, I think, it's a uniqueness factor as well, right? People are looking for that kind of interesting, unique, boutique thing that they can access very easily that you may not find everywhere. And, you know, that's a consumer sentiment that you see a lot, but in Clawson, I think you're a little better positioned to get it because of the type of community you are, because you've got a downtown and you've got this kind of older fabric. You're not a cul-de-sac world. It's a traditional grid city where you really can get around, you know, by walking, and those types of businesses like to locate in a place like this that has some character and has a little bit of time stamping. If you can find like a cool old building or something to go into, a lot of those businesses do kind of aim for that.
I'm wondering what Clausen, having more of Clausen and Clausen pertains to. What that means.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Maybe that's to the point we were talking earlier where we need more city-owned green space? I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah.
How many hits does it take to get on this board? Do you know off the top of your head? If not,
So it's the top 68 most frequently used words, and it had to have, I'm trying to remember exactly, it was just about double, I think it was just into double digits in terms of mentions to be one of the small ones. But the ones that are real big, they were mentioned many.
so like to get, you'd have to be mentioned 10 times to be a small
I think so,
word?
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I had a couple questions here. I didn't put the graphs on here. I put the actual data on here because the graphs didn't include the whole question the way it outputs. It's kind of irritating. I couldn't figure out a way to get the whole question on there. So here we were asking, which of the following do you think would do the most to improve walking and bicycling in the city? And one of the reasons I like to ask questions like this is this gives us insight into people's own feelings about how safe they are doing these things now and what their own level of comfort is. Because, as experts, we kind of know, well, you do this, you do this, you do this, and it makes things a little safer. But we want to know about people's own impressions of what would make things safer, because doing those things is what's going to improve their impressions of how safe it is to walk, right? So more crosswalks gets a decent amount of response. Interestingly, amenities such as benches, trash cans, etc., was the number 2 item here. So it seems like what we're hearing there is this is probably not really for neighborhoods, but it's more when you get out on the main roads. People don't just want like a bare sidewalk. They want something around it that makes it feel kind of like a place, like they're actually somewhere, as opposed to just walking down a road trying to get past something. I found it really interesting that one was so high.
I think that's, if I can offer my perspective, I think of like Royal Oak, where there's a lot of options to grab ice cream and go sit down
sure, yeah.
and then toss your stuff and not have to carry it home with you.
Yeah.
And we've had problems with trash collection and benches and seating. Besides the alley now that has seating things too,
Sure.
that was new. You couldn't even have your coffee outside for a long time without having to walk and do it.
Sure.
So that could be part of that. I was interested too in the other one, which is street trees and landscaping. So do you think that has to do with just being cool walking on a hot day, or do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think it has, there's a few things. One is it just makes a place feel less harsh to have that around. Having plants and a natural, textures around you kind of softens an environment. So I think a lot of people are responding to that. There is a shade element, so when it's hot, the leaves are going to be on the trees. You'll get more relief from the sun in the summer, and then there's a little bit of a kind of sense of enclosure that trees create as well, where you don't feel as exposed when you're walking in an area with lots of trees.
Yeah.
And if
Because we
you're
can't-
walking on a sidewalk next to a busy road, that sense of exposure might feel threatening, right?
Right. Yeah, we can't do a lot with, benches and trash cans. It's not really exactly, our purview, but
Right.
we can look to have more green space for, new residential buildings and things like that.
Right.
So that's helpful information.
To me, both of those kind of speak to a communal feel of just a shared
Right.
space, a shared joining together, a hanging out, a kind of gathering, which is reminiscent of a lot of the answers to what makes Clawson special or whatever. So these weren't specific to areas though. So I do find it interesting because when you think of a park of walking around, there's trash cans, there's lots of places to sit, but it does sound like more so throughout the downtown. Is that your impression that it's like a gathering? They'd like to spend more time downtown and gathering and walking.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it points to downtown, and then some of it does just point more towards your main roads, where I think people just kind of feel like they're in sort of a concrete area walking next to the main roads, and they want a little bit more of a friendly or natural feel to those areas. Makes them feel more welcoming. I mean, the number one answer here is very pragmatic: improve and maintain sidewalks. So the better condition your sidewalks are in, the easier they are to walk on. I mean, it's very straightforward. And of course, there's a capital element to that as well. You have to be able to, put some investment into it.
Well, what I thought of at that point is, especially I was thinking downtown, there's so many issues going on there with the walkways they're fun to jump on your bike, those divots, but in terms of walking and safety, there's a lot of issues with just being able to walk around downtown or, ADA pushing someone around downtown.
And that arose on our map questions. There are several, because people were allowed to put a dot on the map and say whatever they wanted to about that dot. So there were a few people calling from a bike parking downtown, and there were a bunch of people who were pointing out, hey, there's bricks raised here, there's bricks raised here, there's some sort of obstruction here. And the nice thing about that map question is we can take that and we can just have it as a reference for the city. It's like, here's where people said there were problems.
Right.
And here's what they said the problems were. So every dot on the map has a number associated with it, and then you can cross-reference that to a spreadsheet. So it's like, okay, number 35, here's what the person said about dot number 35.
Has anyone ever looked into what it might cost to, I hate to say pave, but just to, what the benefit might be to downtown, to the walkability? I know people have tripped on those, they've stubbed their toe on the bricks. What?
We're still paying for those bricks.
Oh, are we? Jeez, okay. So no?
Let's backtrack for a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not something we're going to put in our master plan then, Nick?
I think maybe the next one.
Oh, geez, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. But there are certain things that we could be doing probably to make sure that there's less risk. Let's put it that way. Another one that got a fair number of responses is better lighting, which is an interesting one. Because we want to be careful about overlighting, because that's just obnoxious and it screws with people's sleep, and you've got, your raccoons are up in the middle of the day, and you got squirrels running on your roof at night because it's too bright. But you also do have to light for safety. So there could be some, we don't necessarily control all of our lighting. Some of that is other agencies and corporations, as far as our street lighting is concerned. Yeah, DTE is really the main one there. So maybe doing a bit of a survey of that and seeing if it's possible to get a little more uniformity of coverage. Because, again, you don't want it to be jarring. You want it to kind of be the right color, too, so you don't have this, harsh white light at night. But there may be some things that could be done there. Bicycle lanes, more bike parking, more crosswalks, some of those are all ultimately capital improvement items, but crosswalks, that's a relatively inexpensive capital improvement item as far as just striping. If you're trying to put hawk signals in, and then the cost goes up quite a lot. But there's probably things that we could look at, even within neighborhoods, where if you've got a four-way stop or something that's a problem area that people kind of roll through it, just painting a crosswalk there might be enough of a reminder to get people to spend a little more time at the stop sign. It's kind of amazing what the psychological impact of some very simple interventions can be. So that's something that we might want to think about. And, you know, as I'm writing the traffic control or traffic calming content for the draft, you know, which we of course talked about, that's something that I'm incorporating into that, kind of low-cost interventions that could potentially get you some results.
And is that
in the
something we'd
short
want to
term.
talk about around the school? With
It's
the
probably
added
the biggest
students?
area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that something we would look to refer to a traffic safety board to give us advice on?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the city engineer is probably going to be a good resource on that. But yeah, around the school is one of the principal areas we'd want to be looking at. Schools, because we still got more than one. We had another similar kind of complementary question from the following list. Select the statements that apply to you. Just trying to get a sense of people's current sentiment. So I walk, run, or ride a bicycle for recreation and exercise. A lot of our respondents do that, 70%. So lots of people, in terms of their recreation, are doing some sort of active outside, I'm running, I'm biking, I'm walking, to get themselves going. I sometimes walk or ride a bicycle to run errands. 37%, that's pretty good for the United States of America. We have a lot of communities where that number is way, way, way lower. That speaks to the urban form of Clawson and the fact that it's, you know, a more historical community that has some things that are close to neighborhoods. I feel safe biking on the street. That's an interesting percentage there because it's only a quarter of the people who answered this question. And that means that there's work to be done because people have very different levels of tolerance as far as getting on a bike and going down the street. You might be sort of in my realm where you're pretty confident on roads with relatively slow traffic or they're kind of side roads and things, but you're not going to ride on a mile road or something like that. You're just not going to do it. And you might be extremely bold and you own an entire closet full of spandex and you're going to go down whatever road you want to. Or you might be very timid and you might not feel safe going on the road at all. You might ride on the sidewalk in a neighborhood. So there's a huge range of how comfortable people feel riding on a road in the first place. But we know from this, you know, answer here that a lot of people don't feel particularly safe. So there's probably some things that we can do to maybe improve that. And we'll be looking at what those might be. And there is, of course, as always, sort of a graduated list of those interventions from the relatively low cost to the relatively high cost. And you might look at potentially the low cost interventions first to see if they improve things and then move on to the higher cost interventions later if you feel that there's still improvement that needs to be done. I always drive to run errands. Interestingly, that's got this almost the same number of responses as I sometimes walk or ride a bike to run errands. So we do have about a third of people who they literally always get in their car to run errands. This probably varies a little bit depending on where in the neighborhoods they live, because some areas of the city are simply further from convenience commercial than others. But I would like to be able to walk or bike to run errands but do not feel safe. Actually got a pretty low number of responses. And then I would like to be able to walk or bike to run errands, but the distance is too far. Got a few more. So yeah, there definitely are a few parts of the city where I think people just, even if they like to, it's just a little bit further than they feel comfortable walking, carrying a grocery bag or something like that. That is that. I'm going to bring up those maps now, and that'll be the end of it. I'll stop that share. And I can get the maps. So we've got two maps here. And we won't get into a ton of detail on them. It is getting close to 9, but I just wanted to show them to you and talk about kind of what they indicate. So getting into PDF. So this is one of them. This is where we asked people to show us where they had noticed that there were issues with flooding, sidewalks, or the road condition. And the purple dots, I'll zoom in a little bit and we can move around the city. Purple dots are the flooding indicators. The blue are the sidewalk, and this kind of lime green is road condition. So one thing you notice is that flooding has some concentrations, and this is probably not going to be surprising to the DPW because they know where they're going on calls and things. But it is interesting to us from a visualization standpoint. And the comments in here are pretty helpful. A person would say, my basement flooded or has flooded for many, many years in this location. This dot on Clawson City Park at the north end notes where there's frequent pooling of water in the park. So there's some sort of drainage problem there. People really did give us actually a lot of detail to work with. Where you see the sidewalk related dots, usually that is a problem with the evenness of the sidewalk. In a couple of cases, it's telling us about gaps. When you go up north 1, 2, and 3, it talks about sites where there aren't sidewalks along Maple. Although one of those is actually about to have one, so making progress. And then roads, people, you can see there's a few roads where there's like a line of dots going down the road, and that tells us, well, okay, this road is probably something that needs some attention.
So each dot is just one respondent?
It's one respondent, yeah.
Was there anything to track if there were multiple respondents hitting on the same part? or-
You'll get multiple dots. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. You'll get more than one response
Gotcha.
popping up, and almost everyone put a caption in there.
And you didn't allow any individual to put multiple dots down, right?
Yes, yeah. People could put down as
As I
many
personally
as they
know,
wanted.
so.
Oh, okay, so.
I'm recognizing
must
some of
live
my
on
dots
Phillips,
as
so.
we speak, so.
And I think this is like illuminating for sure, Joe. I always just play devil's advocate to data because with the downtown survey, they did ask for your address, I believe. We did not for this survey, correct?
It was not required. People were able to give their address.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause I
But they
mean, just-
did, the email address it did for this one, I believe.
I've just meant like
Yeah.
residential address.
Resi- oh.
So the way I'm trying to make sense of this data, just as a person who looks at a lot of data, is, is this where a lot of the respondents came from? And so they're just marking the areas they're familiar with? Or is this really, of equal distribution of the city, it is truly gathering just in this, northeast quadrant, right?
Right,
So I don't
yeah.
know if you have that level of information, if you can back into that in any way.
Yeah, we do have some level of that information, and
Like,
we
even
did
just plotting
actually.
the residents that you captured, just to see what
Yes.
the distribution was, would be helpful.
Sure, yeah.
But I think either way, this is still drawing attention to problem areas.
Right.
It's just helpful to kind of take that noise out of the data.
Sure, yeah. We do, and we do have actually kind of like every part of the city is covered in some degree, to some degree. Yeah, we do have some of that information that can help us kind of parse out whether or not people were really focused on their own front yard or if they were kind of ranging a little bit. And it seems like, based on the responses, some people did range some, and other people really focused on their little corner of the world.
Do you know how many people responded or dropped pins? How many different people, different accounts dropped pins?
70 something.
70, so that's
yeah.
that's not even a third of the respondents overall, right?
That's right, yeah, and it takes a little more effort to answer this
Yeah.
question,
You have to be very passionate about it as a data point,
Right,
too,
yeah,
right?
you have to have maybe something that's been bothering you.
Right, hence Mr. Tinlin, right?
Lost my neighbor's collect, no, I
Oh,
like
it
to
was your
drop
neighbor.
dots, so I had a whole bunch of 3x5 cars as I was putting stuff down in.
Nice. The other one, this is kind of a more general map, and we got fewer responses on this one, so it's definitely less thorough coverage. But it allowed people to sort of focus on where they felt that there was a poor crossing environment, or we did allow people to say road condition on this one as well. We got some very passionate comments on this one about certain roads. If anybody ever brings up Red Roof to you, there's probably going to be some serious discussion to be had. There's some, the blue dots speak to general safety concerns where people gave us a variety of input on those. And then there's some other, the others in downtown were all basically asking for more bike parking because there's only a couple racks really downtown. There's not a lot. Yeah, we do have some more sidewalk concerns on here as well.
And those aren't really bike racks either. Like, when you use them, anyway, I've used them in, I put one bike on my son's on one side and mine on the other, and that's pretty much the whole rack.
That's all it is, yeah.
So, really, each rack is, used by two people, maybe?
Right.
So, maybe an expansive style of a rack might be helpful so that you can have multiple people tagging onto it, or not having to cross the street to use it, or,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that has come up a fair amount in the questions that we've been asking, and it's something we're working on putting into this plan. When we're addressing parking, we want to also address bicycle parking and not just vehicles, because if people know they're not going to have anywhere to put their bike when they get where they're going, they're a lot less likely to use their bike to get there.
Well, and something I always consider is my ability to see the bike where I'm at, too. I lock it up, and maybe I'm just paranoid. I had a bike stolen when I was a kid, whatever. But I think that having them in certain specific places is important versus a parking lot, because you don't necessarily feel great about going into Warp 9 if your bike's a mile down the road, just having a visualization. So I don't know if there's something we talk about in there for the placement of them in the location for walkability, or no?
Yes, locational aspects of bike racks are important because you want them to be observed. Mm-hmm. They should be in a place where you can see them. And, if they're in a place where you can see them and they're also maybe a little less vulnerable to the elements, so much the better. But definitely their visibility is very, very important. So when we think about siting bike parking facilities, that's definitely one of the aspects that we consider most strongly. And then also, you have to have adequate space and things like that. But, those are technical aspects. But yeah, we want to make sure that we're not tucking bikes away in a corner where anything could happen, right?
Right, okay.
And that was what I had for tonight, and we'll get into the rest of it next time, because there is a lot more. I think that, we got a lot to work with here and a lot to respond to. I think it's confirmed some of our, some of what we expected. And it's also, brought up some things that in some cases are more general and in other cases are highly specific that, it's useful to have those things brought to our attention. And, we might not necessarily address every one of these dots in the master plan individually, but we can address them in terms of a framework, and then the individual locations can be used by the city if there's going to be any kind of specific location-specific interventions.
Is there ever a time that cities discuss that during their capital improvement process, or no? Because I know capital improvement, we're still learning about that aspect, but if we see a capital improvement plan that say that is completely lacking a certain area that we've found and called attention to in our master plan, and it's something that seems to be not in any 3-5 years of a capital improvement, is that something that cities how do cities address that? How do they go about that?
Yeah, that is something you can call attention to in your review of the capital improvement plan. And if we provide good information to the people who are putting the plan together from this survey, so that they have it available to them, they're more likely to actually be able to point out some of these areas and target them for improvement or maintenance or whatever happens to be needed. But yes, the planning commission can say, hey, there's an area that we called out, and we just want to put it on the record that we're noting that this area has been identified and we'd like to see it addressed at some point. And ultimately, that's resource dependent, whether or not the city can address it. But the planning commission is assigned to review a capital improvement plan for that reason, really. So it's something that's certainly fair game to point out.
Okay.
That was it for tonight, like I said, and there's plenty more to go over next time, but that's if there are any other questions or comments, certainly love to entertain them, but I don't have anything else to present.
That was good stuff.
Right. Well, thank you, and we can move to the next agenda item.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is the Planning Commission 2023 Annual Report, which I guess we're going to accept this and we're going to vote on this, approval to send it on to the mayor and council, I'm assuming,
That's right.
as we have done in the past.
Yeah, so what you'll do is, provided you're comfortable with the content of the report, you will send it on to council. They receive and file it. They don't really do anything with it. Hope they might read it, but their action is to receive and file. And this is something that's required by statute, and the Planning Enabling Act requires us to do an annual report, and it basically is the Planning Commission's opportunity to tell council, here's what we were working on last year. And we try to, basically list all the agenda items and then talk about all the plans that were approved and kind of summarize what they were, and then other projects that were worked on as well.
Are the terms 2 years or 3 years?
3.
That's what I thought. So should I, because I was reinstated last year, so would that be something I need to correct on this part, or no?
Well, it's certainly something that we want to make sure is accurate. So if you've got an expiration date that is
So I
different
guess-
from what's in the plan, then we would correct that
Okay.
before we send it to council.
I also have an edit because I'm not and have not served as secretary. I don't know if it was you,
It was me.
so.
Oh, we probably just put it on the wrong line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
that should be Mr. Tillman right now. And why are there two asterisks there under Tillman and Twidell?
Yeah. I was going to ask the same question, is that because you're special, or you just get an asterisk?
There's no footnotes.
Yeah, I know, I was looking for the footnote as well.
Oh, yeah, the footnote disappeared. It was basically noting that Twidell served for a few months and then Tinlin took his place. That's all it was. The footnote, I don't know what happened to the footnote, but it was there. But it seems to be gone now, so I will put a little comment in there to resurrect that. And footnote. And Nick's got a list of all the expiration dates of the term, so we'll make sure that, we'll verify that those are all correct.
Okay.
Yeah, mayor and council is still working on how to approve that. The policy is
Did it change, that policy? change?
slightly changed. I think they're going to go back to the original way it was. Some of the council members wanted to see the list of names rather than just get one name thrown at them.
Oh, but they didn't change the years, the term
I don't
years,
know, legally,
though.
I don't know how that's going to change.
The
I don't-
3-year term is statutory, so that's never going to
Okay.
change.
Okay.
And like I said before, Mr. Scott here, it says he's expired, but he's not until we find a replacement, which hopefully will just replace you with you.
Oh, I reapplied, so.
Okay, good. You got your reapplication in, well, that should move it right along then.
Yes, yes. And the statutory thing is that you serve until replaced, so. Any other questions or comments?
Aside, it hasn't really changed from the last one, right? Oh, it's the list of things that we've accomplished last year. Yeah.
I would suggest you guys could beef up the training section, considering that Nick had us all apply for formal training. Some of us may or may not have done it. But also, I think, Joe, for you and Andy, you guys have on multiple occasions came in with some training on different ordinances and zoning. So I think it's worth tooting your own horn because you guys have been very helpful to bring it to us if we're not going to it.
Okay.
So Joe, can we still make a motion to approve this with your edits?
Yes.
Would you like to do so? I'm happy with it. Make a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the planning summary report that's going to be submitted to council.
Second.
Got support. Any other comments? Anybody want to change anything else on it? And can we pull roll call, please?
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Colbert,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to send the annual report on to mayor and council. Next agenda item is number 10, other business. We have anything under other business? Seeing none, how about a planner's report?
You've had my report for tonight.
You've been saying that a lot lately.
Talk a lot.
Staff report and training opportunities.
I don't have anything specific to point out to, but just alluding back to what Commissioner Solomon said, everyone is registered for the citizen planner. I haven't gotten a report on how much progress you guys have made, so I'm going to try and get that so we can see where everyone is. So please make sure to sign in and try to make some progress on the citizen planner in the meantime. And then if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have one question on your part here after ordinance updates. The ordinance is the wall height requirements. And there's two asterisks. One says the amendment proposal was approved on September the 12th. The second dot is what's confusing me. Secondary review of an ordinance amendment regarding walls being reviewed by Giffords and Webster. What is the question on the walls? Why is it being delayed?
So there was another, during that original conversation, I believe the planning commission wanted to continue discussion on a part of the ordinance amendment, and it just hasn't been brought up as we've been trying to make progress on the master plan, but it's still on the radar to bring back up.
This is what raises the wall height to 6 feet between residential and commercial,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that would have, been really covered by now. Because it looks like in August we were talking about it.
I think it's just been, all resources have been on site plans and the master plan stuff right now, so once there is a little bit of a slower time, we'll get that back in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
And then just obviously knowing that if any projects come in, we'll share that with them, that you'll be, if it's not in their plan, it'll be certainly talked about during the planning commission meeting.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for?
I would just say, Nick, again, it's very helpful. I appreciate the site plan updates and what's coming. Was there any update, because I just get questions or I see things on Facebook around the Burger King location in terms of like breaking ground and starting that?
No major updates right now that will get people excited, but hoping to have something in the near future that we can, talk about when, with an update, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the other main locations that get a lot of attention or
Yeah.
provided updates here.
Yeah. So, and again, still working on some type of online way for the public to view this stuff, but just been trying to tackle some other projects right now, making sure that the actual shovels are getting the ground before we get everything online. So that's coming, and once I have some type of draft, we'll share it with you, get some feedback on it, kind of as guinea pigs, and then we'll make it better and go from there. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Do we have a legal update, seeing as we have a lawyer tonight?
No, nothing this evening.
Not even high or anything? Okay. And if anybody else has any comments before we close it down, if nothing else to be said, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Support.
Motion, support, roll call, please.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Mr. Colbert?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, yeah.